When people think of the Second World War, they often picture tanks rolling across Europe or dogfights raging in the skies. But you know, there's another side to the story. One lived in basements, shelters, forests, and prisoner of war camps. For millions of people, survival was not a matter of victory or defeat, but of enduring hunger, cold, and scarcity day after day. Ration books ran thin, supplies vanished, and entire populations were forced to get by with whatever scraps they could find. Out of this pressure came ingenuity, small hacks that turned waste into warmth, scraps into meals, and desperation into resilience. What makes these survival methods so valuable today is not just their historical importance, but the fact that they remain entirely practical for anyone preparing for uncertain times. Food was never guaranteed during the war. Soldiers received rations like bully beef, hardtack or powdered milk, while civilians stretched out meagre supplies from ration books. Cooking fuel was often harder to find than the food itself. To solve this, people learned to turn empty tins into improvised stoves. By punching air holes around the bottom and filling the can with twigs, rolled cardboard soaked in wax, or even strips of cloth dipped in fat, they created small hobo stoves that could boil water or warm a tin of food with surprising efficiency. These makeshift stoves burned hotter than an open fire, used less fuel, and gave off less smoke, a crucial advantage in both blackout cities and foxholes. For modern survivalists, the lesson is straightforward. Always see containers as more than waste. A single can becomes a portable cooker, able to turn scraps of fuel into a hot meal when gas or electricity is gone. The winters of the early 1940s were brutally cold. Coal was rationed, wood was scarce, and homes bombed in cities like London or Dresden offered little protection from the chill. People turned to what they had in abundance: old newspapers. Civilians stuffed them into clothing, lined the insides of boots, or layered them under bedding. Soldiers on the Eastern Front and in POW camps did the same, wrapping newspapers around their torsos or under uniforms for insulation. The science was simple. Trapped air is a better insulator than most fabrics, and layers of paper held it well. For a family huddling in a basement or a soldier freezing in a trench, it could mean the difference between life and death. Even today, this hack applies. In an emergency, newspapers, cardboard, or even paper bags can be life-saving insulation in clothing or shelter walls. It is a reminder that warmth doesn't always come from fire. Sometimes it comes from layers and ingenuity. Clean water was one of the rarest resources during the war. Bombings often destroyed pipelines, and retreating armies left wells fouled or poisoned. Soldiers, resistance fighters and civilians had to drink from whatever streams, ponds or craters they could find. One simple solution was using charcoal from burned wood. Ground into chunks and wrapped in cloth or packed into a container, charcoal filtered water by removing dirt, odours and many toxins. While it did not make water completely sterile, it improved both taste and safety. Whenever possible, boiling was added for full purification. This method, born from necessity, remains as useful now as it was then. A campfire's charcoal is more than waste. It is the foundation for a survival water filter that anyone can build with a container and fabric. Rations during the war often fell short of daily nutrition needs. In Britain, families made do with powdered eggs and small allotments of meat, sugar and butter. In occupied countries, shortages were even worse. To fill the gap, people turned to wild plants. Nettles were boiled into soups, dandelion greens added to stews, sorrel and chickweed used as fresh salad. Not only did these plants provide bulk to stretch small meals, they delivered vital vitamins that prevented malnutrition and scurvy. Soldiers far from supply lines also learned to gather berries, mushrooms and roots, often with the help of locals. This tradition connects the war years to today's survival needs. The weeds growing in any abandoned lot or roadside ditch may hold the nutrients needed to keep a body alive when other food sources fail. Knowing what to harvest is as valuable now as it was under rationing. Food production was one of the biggest survival fronts of the war. Victory gardens sprouted in backyards and public parks, feeding families when imports disappeared. Without access to fertilizers, people turned to what they had on hand. Ashes from stoves and soot from chimneys were spread across beds and fields, adding potassium, calcium and trace minerals that boosted vegetable yields. Nothing was discarded. Even the waste of fire was transformed into nourishment for soil. For today's gardener or prepper, this remains one of the simplest ways to maintain fertility without chemical input. A fireplace or fire pit produces steady amendments for soil, ensuring crops remain strong in lean times. WWII 2 teaches us that survival often comes from seeing resources where others see waste. Light was a scarce luxury during the war. Strict blackout laws meant no open flames in city windows, and candles were often too costly or hard to find. Families and soldiers alike made lamps from leftover fat. Bacon drippings, mutton grease or lard were poured into jars or tins with a strip of cloth serving as the wick. These makeshift lamps burned with a steady flame, providing light for cooking, reading or simply surviving the dark. This hack is just as relevant today. In any off-grid or emergency situation, grease from cooking can be turned into light or heat. It demonstrates the wartime ethic of never wasting even the smallest scrap, because in desperate conditions everything has value. In POW camps and occupied cities, one item carried more value than almost anything else: cigarettes. They were portable, divisible, and universally desired. A single cigarette could buy food, medicine, or favours. Non-smokers often hoarded them specifically for trade, knowing their worth exceeded any official currency. Entire microeconomies formed around them, teaching an important survival lesson. The most valuable item in desperate times is not always the one you consume, but the one everyone else wants. Modern preppers can draw a timeless principle from this. In any collapse, barter will replace money. Identifying small, high-demand goods, whether tobacco, salt, or simple tools, is as crucial today as it was in the 1940s. These 7 hacks show how ordinary people survived extraordinary times. Tin cans became stoves, newspapers became insulation, charcoal filtered water, weeds became food, ashes fed gardens, grease lit the dark, and cigarettes fueled trade. Each one grew from the same soil of necessity. Nothing wasted, everything repurposed. For those of us who study history seriously, these are not quaint stories from the past. They are working examples of resilience that still matter today. Modern survivalists, preppers, and even curious gardeners can learn directly from the people who endured the world's darkest years. The lesson is clear. Survival isn't about gadgets or high-tech gear. It's about resourcefulness, adaptability, and using what's at hand. World War II tested humanity in every possible way. Soldiers on the front lines and civilians at home faced shortages, hunger, and relentless pressure. Yet they survived by rethinking the ordinary, turning scraps into stoves, paper into warmth, weeds into meals, and fat into light. These methods worked then, and they still work now. They prove that resilience is timeless. If you value learning from the past and want to keep exploring the forgotten survival wisdom that carried people through history's hardest years, share this with fellow history buffs and survivalists. And don't forget to subscribe to In the Beginning for more deep dives into the lessons our ancestors left behind. The ingenuity of World War II is more than history. It's a handbook for survival that still speaks to us today.